Tonight, Minority continues its onslaught on the 2025 budget, declaring the finance minister failed to address the many issues confronting Ghanaians, including jobs and the cost of living.
A number of issues were raised by many Ghanaian youth and small businesses. They were expecting that this new economic policy 2025 will address, among other things, cost of living challenges, unemployment, investment in infrastructure. Unfortunately, these issues have not been addressed by the economic policy.
We have details from Parliament on the day the minority have been warning against the country returning to the bond market.
The minister has announced that he is going into the bond markets. They are going to open up the bond markets. And I'm saying that this is not good advice.
We'll be delving into the minority concerns tonight on Top Story. Top Stories, as always, brought to you by Telecel, connecting energies, holy insecticide spray and coil. Enjoy a holy sleep. My name is Faustina Safo. Please stay for details. Tonight, the minority in Parliament have torn into the 2025 budget, insisting it has completely failed to deal with the real issues affecting the ordinary Ghanaian. According to the minority, the budget did not provide adequate policies to create jobs and to deal with the escalating cost of living. Addressing journalists to offer their formal position on the 2025 budget, the ranking member on the Committee on Economy and Development, Kojo Nkrumah, said that the government has gotten all its priorities wrong with the harsh economic climate set to worsen.
You will recall that a number of issues were raised by many Ghanaian youth and small businesses. They were expecting that this new economic policy 2025 will address, among other things, cost of living challenges, that it will address, among other things, unemployment, that it will address investment in infrastructure, that it will address investment in education, and efforts to improve the business climate, investment in healthcare, among others. Unfortunately, these issues have not been addressed by the economic policy. The priorities are elsewhere. For those who are looking forward to efforts to halt further increases in electricity bills, they have been disappointed to note that electricity prices will rather be adjusted every quarter. Now, you will recall that the MPP introduced the Planting for Food and Jobs program, which was aimed at boosting productivity. But there were some outstanding issues that needed to be dealt with to ensure that that increased productivity could translate into stable or reduced prices at the markets. In the policies outlined by the government in this 2025 budget, there are no efforts to deal with those outstanding issues. The government's program is only to boost production like the MPP did. The key remaining challenges, such as transportation of food items from farm gates, poor storage of foodstuffs, and a liberalized pricing regime, have not been attended to. And what it means is that the continuous increase in food prices have not been addressed. Infrastructure investments are known to be a key if you want to open up, grow the economy, create more jobs. Unfortunately, however, the government has failed in making the necessary budget allocations to give meaning to even their own planned infrastructure program. Their planned infrastructure program is what? The big push. $10 billion. If you prorate it over 4 years, that's about 2.5 billion cedis or $2.5 billion per annum. You will expect that if the government itself is serious about its own big push, they will at least make available $2.5 billion in their first budget when they have all the goodwill and the credibility. If you go into the fiscal tables, it's only $800 million.
Well, the former finance minister, Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, warned the new government against returning to the bond market to borrow.
So you are saying that MPP has overborrowed. Yet we ended our tenure with 61.8%. But you, who didn't borrow, you ended your term with 73%. Ladies and gentlemen, it is surprising, nevertheless, that notwithstanding the improvement in the debt environment, the timing of the announcement of the minister to enter bond markets, and I'm sure you have heard the minister has announced that he is going into the bond markets. They are going to open up the bond markets. And I'm saying that this is not good advice. And this is my reason. The timing for the announcement of the minister to open the bond market coincided with the announcement of the elevated fiscal deficit based on their manipulated data, a condition that exposes the country to high risk of borrowing from the markets. The effects of this unfortunate data manipulation are already hitting our economy, already, since they read the budget. Why do I say that? The government must know that just by presenting such erroneous data as propaganda to score cheap political points, Ghana's sovereign bond spreads are already widening, again, nearing 700 basis points, when almost 3 months ago, this had declined to 500 basis points and was even heading further downwards. Why do we want to destroy the gains which we have made through cheap politics? Also, Bloomberg reported last Tuesday, 11th March, the very day the budget was presented to Parliament, that Ghana's dollar sovereign bonds were among bottom performers in emerging markets, after the Minister for Finance said the country missed a primary budget balance target of 2024. Just after saying that, this is what the market is saying to us. Dollar bonds due 2035 declined 1.8%. Notes maturing in 2029 fell by 1%. So international markets have not reacted kindly to the budget, demonstrating their lack of confidence in the government's economic policy direction.
Well, you heard there the former finance minister, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. Well, he had joined 99.7 FM. We've been doing some digging, really, and details from an IMF staff report last year revealed that the NPP-led government had actually planned to re-enter the domestic bond market in 2025. Well, joining me in the studio now is Caleb Ziblim. He's a member of our research desk here at Joy News. Thank you so much. Let's tell us what exactly you found.
Yes, so Faustina, in the IMF Ghana staff reports released after the third review of Ghana's ongoing IMF program on 2nd December 2024, the fund disclosed that the previous government planned to return to the domestic bond market in the second quarter of this year, that started in April 2025. The discussions that informed this report ended on 4th October 2024, and the final report was completed on 13th November, before being considered by the IMF Executive Board in December. The report states, and I quote, "While government's financing has relied heavily on T-bills, the authorities, that's Ghana, intend to re-access the domestic bond market next year. The government has been issuing large amounts of T-bills over the past 2 years, relying on demand from non-bank investors. The authorities intend to gradually resume domestic bond issuances in 2025, with the first issuance of a 2-year bond planned in the second quarter of 2025.
Thank you, Caleb, for that detail. Now, let me bring in Parliamentary Affairs correspondent Kweku Asante. You were in Parliament the whole day. You joined that press conference. Let's talk about the claims the minority is making, especially with regards to the budget. They say it lacks credibility. Tell us more.
Well, yes, according to Abinal Siasare, who was a Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, you look at the appendices of the budget that was presented by the Minister, you look at the actual, some of the things that the Minister did read in the statement. It clearly shows that the Finance Minister did not set out to tell the true state of the economy that was inherited, and that in fact they pick and choose which of the figures look good for them and then put it up. He also compared, for instance, the entire appropriation, talks about how much was appropriated last year and the current almost 290 billion that the finance minister is requesting for. And her conclusion is that the budget simply does not meet the threshold of credibility needed to move the country forward.
When you look, if you listen to the minister on Tuesday, in paragraph 173, the minister stated in the budget statement that they are projecting a tax revenue percentage of 17.2%. So clearly, two different figures are being shown here. But like I always say to people, the real details are in the budget. The real details are in the appendices of the budget. Minister in his speech says, I'm growing revenue by 17.2% of tax to GDP ratio. And then you come into the budget and it's 16.1%. Clearly, there's a problem with the credibility of our budget. Let me come to the expenditures as well. My minister, the former minister, made mention of a 24-hour economy, and so I will skip that. But let me say that when you compare our expenditures in 2024, when we had an election, usually with elections, the government spends so much because they have to give the Electoral Commission everything that they will need to conduct a free and fair election. So when you look at the appropriation for 2024, clearly with an election that was fully funded by government alone, the appropriation was 250 billion Ghana cedis. Here we are, NDC telling us that they want to cut waste, reduce, rationalize expenditure, and reduce the waste in the system. They are giving us an expenditure, an appropriation of 291 billion Ghana cedis. 291 billion Ghana cedis. No election. We are cutting down. So they say one thing, and the numbers in the budget speaks to something completely different. That also boils down to the credibility of the budget.
Kwaku, really, there's this sticking point of allocation to the Office of Government Machinery. The minority, they've been raising issues with that. Tell me more.
Well, according to the minority and the position that they've raised, in particular with regards to the expenditure items in the budget having to do with the Office of the Government Machinery, they have been on the point that John Dramani Mahama, despite claiming to have employed very few people into the presidency, seem to have inflated the budget of the Office of the Government Machinery compared to what the NPP did allocate to the presidency last budget year. And so according to Gideon Boako, you look at some of the expenditure at the Office of Government Machinery, they are simply not relevant. And he wonders why the NDC can say they are cutting waste and then at the same time raising expenditure at the Office of the Government Machinery, the presidency.
If you go to Appendix 4A, page 139 of this budget document that was presented to Parliament, it talks about some of the expenditure lines. And under the Office of Government Machinery, we have a research department. And the research department, when President Akufo-Addo was there, he had a research department headed by Dr. Azekosu Mensah. President Mahama is allocating 50 million cedis for goods and services for research department at the Office of Government Machinery. A4 sheets, printers, pens and papers, office at the Office of the Research Department. All of that 50 million cedis. And CAPES, 20 million cedis. Office of Government Machinery, Research Department. Maybe a head and 2 or 3 assistants sitting in one office, 70 million cedis. This is a government that wants to cut costs. Again, the same appendix. We have government communication. This is Felix Ofosu-Kwakye and Shamima Muslim. Government communication. They said they have collapsed Ministry of Information. They've saved money. Yet, under government communication, headed by Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, deputized by Shamima Muslim, let's say they have 2 or 3 research assistants helping them, scrolling through social media, Ghana Web, to see what is happening there to respond. They are giving them goods and services budget of 8.8 million cedis. Maybe they will use some to buy internet data to go to the internet, TikTok and co, to respond to what minority is saying. And they are giving them 70 million cedis, making 78.8 million. This is higher than about 3 or 4 ministries put together under President Akufo-Addo. This is higher than 3 or 4 ministries' budgets put together under President Akufo-Addo. This is the lean government Ghanaians voted for.
Well, the Minister of State in charge of government communications, Felix Kwakye Ofosu, has since denied claims that his office has been allocated some 78 billion cedis to manage government communications. In a Facebook post, he maintained that the NPP is deliberately spreading falsehood.
11 billion Ghana cedis has not been given to President Mahama. The monies that Dr. Gideon Buakun is referring to are monies going to the payment of civil servants who have been placed here because their mother ministries have been collapsed. Now, because of the scrap of the ministry, now there is myself, there is Shamima Muslim, my deputy, there is Sam Aprat, who is the press secretary to the vice president, and an administrative staff of 3 and 2 other people who help us manage the entire communications of both the presidency and the entirety of government communications. And this is done by barely 7 people. Again, it is not true that I have been allocated a total of 78 million Ghana cedis to manage government communications. That is false. What it is that all the 3 agencies who now have been made parts of the Office of Government Machinery, or who are now under the Office of the President, their goods and services budget and their capital expenditure budget is what you see there. As for myself, my deputy, Amma Pratt, and the people who help us, who make up the managers of the communication wing of the presidency and the entire government of Ghana, nobody has given us any goods and services. Nobody has given us any capital expenditure. This is my office. I don't need any capital expenditure again for this my office. The office just before this one is where 2 administrative staff of mine operate, and together with them and the other people I've mentioned, we manage government communication offices. So we've not been given any goods and services. We've not been given any capital expenditure. The goods and services and capital expenditure, making up 78 million, belongs to ISD. That has 1,309 employees. Ghana Broadcasting Corporation with 1,115 civil servants, and the Ghana News Agency with 133 civil servants. We do know that the NPP used to operate slush funds. So if in their time they use such monies on propaganda to pay people to abuse political opponents and spread falsehood about them, that is their own business. But we have no such operation going on. And therefore, I thought it was necessary to engage you, the good people of Ghana, to understand the issues so that you are able to know that Gideon Buakun is peddling falsehood in a desperate effort to provide excuses for the wanton waste that they superintendent in this country. And that is why you, the people of Ghana, voted them out.
Well, tonight on Top Story, I have with me Kojopo Nkrumah. He is ranking member on the Economy and Development Committee in Parliament. Thank you so much for your time. I also have Dr. Yami Befi. He is a senior lecturer at the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I'll start with you, Kojo. You say that the budget lacks credibility. Why exactly?
Because among other things, when you compare the English, the rhetoric and the claims to the numbers, they don't add up. First of all, there's a budget that the government told us was going to see a cut in expenditure. When you look at the numbers in the budget, the 2024 budget by the MPP government that just left had a total appropriation of 250 billion. This budget that they have brought has a total appropriation of 290 billion. That is an increase by some 40 billion. And that cannot be a cut by any stretch of imagination. When you look at this budget, in English terms, we are told that this is a budget that is going to put money in infrastructure and put money in supporting, for example, women. You need about 1.5 billion cedis by our modeling to be able to set up any meaningful women's development bank. This government rather puts 51 million cedis in the Women's Development Bank that cannot even get a license. You need 400 million cedis just for the license, and instead puts about 2.7 billion cedis at the Office of Government Machinery. That cannot, by anybody's stretch of their imagination, show credibility in keeping fidelity with the commitments that have been made verbally. This is a budget that says that it is going to kickstart what they call the big push, a $10 billion infrastructure program. That's about $2.5 billion a year. They put $800 million there, and then instead they put $50 million for research at the Office of the President. So if you compare the English to the numbers, it lacks credibility.
We've been hearing from Felix Kwakye Ofosu tonight, and he's been defending some of the comments that you put out. He says that it is false to say that some 78.8 million Ghana cedis has been allocated to his department, which is government communication, for goods and services, as well as capital expenditure. He breaks it down. He says this actually, the money is allocated to 3 agencies under his department: for ISD, for Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and Ghana News Agency. What's your response to that?
First of all, if that is his answer, it betrays the claim they made earlier that they had made savings by collapsing these ministries. You would recall that when they made this claim, we drew their attention to the fact that they haven't fired anybody from the ministry or from the agency. So no savings whatsoever has been made. And that he himself and his deputy Shamima were still minister and deputy minister who would draw the same salary, the same fuel, the same operational expenditure as though they had been christened properly as minister and deputy minister. And that this claim that they had scrapped the ministry was a hoax, because in terms of the it will still be the same or more. They told us that that was not true, and that the numbers or the figures had been removed because this ministry had been taken away. Now he is resorting to that as his defense. That's the first problem with what he's saying. Secondly, I hope you have a copy of Appendix 4A, MDA Expenditure Allocation 2025 with you. If you look at the 4th row, that is a subtotal. Government communication is 78 million Ghana cedis. That is a matter of fact. In fact, there are 12 agencies under the Office of Government Machinery. The total compensation under Office of Government Machinery is 9 billion Ghana cedis. The Office of the President, Jubilee House alone, is taking 2.7 billion. While the other 11 share the outstanding about 6 billion or so. That raises another question of the disproportionate distribution of the amounts. But if he wants us to believe that 2.7 billion we are talking about compensation is for, like he says, some agencies that were supposedly moved there, why that cannot be true is that when you look at the appendix, it breaks it down. It doesn't just say Office of Government Machinery. It starts off by saying headquarters and agencies. Then it spells out the agencies specifically: Council of State, National Security and Research Department, before Government Communications. If indeed this 2.7 billion had a component of salaries for the agencies he's talking about, it would have been columned under Government Communication. It was not columned there. It was all columned under OGM headquarters. And that is why we do not believe that argument that he's making. Hello? Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, Kojo, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Great. Apologies for that interruption earlier. Now let's go to another concern you're raising. You're raising concern about the timing of the announcement to enter the bond market. You say it is not the best time to do that. But then we have data to prove that as part of your IMF Ghana staff report released after the 3rd review of Ghana's ongoing IMF program in December 2nd, 2024, the fund disclosed that you, previous managers of the economy, you had plans to return to the domestic bond market in the 2nd quarter of 2025. Why the change of thoughts now?
No, we haven't changed. We are saying that it is curious that in one breath, the NDC government sought to claim that we had left debt distress situation that made it impossible for us to go to the capital markets anytime soon, or that made it impossible for us to manage our debt. In another breath, when the results come and show clearly that debt to GDP ratio has dropped to 61.8, the finance minister conveniently refuses to mention it in parliament. Then he turns around to try to take advantage of it to go to the capital markets and to resume borrowing on the capital markets. And we think that that is disingenuous. It is this disingenuity that we are calling out, that give credit where it is due. You cannot claim in one breath that the economy has been so mismanaged, criminally mismanaged, that we don't have access to the capital markets. And then when you come to power, you find that debt to GDP has dropped to 61.8. Remember, the NDC administration left us 63% of GDP and wanted to blame us for 80-something percent. Now GDP figures are out showing 1.2 trillion cedis, and so it drops to 61.8. You refuse to acknowledge it, yet you want to take advantage of it and turn around and go back to the capital markets. And that disingenuity is what we are calling out. We think that there should be credibility and honesty when it comes to the national macro data. And the level of disingenuity they are displaying is the reason for which the bond markets are beginning to punish us. Because when you cook up 49 billion cedis and add it to the budget as unreleased claims, in a bid to show or to prove a claim that we mismanage the economy, which 49 billion is fictitious anyway, the bond markets are beginning to punish you for it. And you are now beginning to put at risk the final review of the IMF program, which review you need to pass to be able to attract the funding from the development partners, which review you need to pass to be able to hold on to the agreements that have been made under the debt exchange program. And so we are calling out and cautioning that this, may I say, propaganda approach to try and paint everything black just to satisfy a political appetite bodes ill for the Ghanaian economy going forward.
Could you stay with me? Let me bring in Dr. Yami Baefi. He is a senior lecturer at GIMPA. He joins us live with his thoughts. Now, we're just hearing from Kojo Nkrumah saying that the international market and the bond market, they're beginning to punish us. And I'll just quote some of the findings we have here at Joy News. According to a Bloomberg report, Ghana's Eurobond fell on Tuesday, which is 11th of March, and it was among the worst performers in emerging markets. And this was just after the finance minister suggested that the country's energy debt could double by 2027. What's your thoughts about Ghana deciding to enter the Eurobond market again?
Good evening to Faustina, and good evening to my senior brother, Honorable Kojo Nkrumah. I think, actually, first of all, looking at the budget statement of the Republic of Ghana is actually the most important source of information for investors if they want to actually invest in Ghana. Therefore, for the finance minister to present a budget that has inconsistencies in its data numbers, or for the finance minister to actually present a budget that does not do justice to even the data presented by its own Ghana's statistical service, that is quite worrying. And I initially thought that the budget was actually going to tell us on how government is actually going to expand the tax base. And initially, looking at the budget statement, the speech itself read by the finance minister, Honorable Keffi Atufor, where he actually mentioned that they were actually targeting a tax to GDP ratio of 17.2%. I initially thought, okay, that won't be bad. But delving deep into the budget and seeing that the actual number, the projection by the budget is 16.1% of GDP, which represents just 0.2 percentage point from what he inherited from the MPP government, which was 15.9% of GDP. I think that I wouldn't support any idea of going back to the bond market, especially when the finance minister has proudly come out to make a bold claim even before the IMF comes to Ghana next month to find out if indeed the government of Ghana is meeting its fiscal targets under the IMF program, he boldly comes out and claims that the government of Ghana has actually missed all its fiscal targets, and therefore the markets are actually reacting unfavorably to Ghanaian bonds. I don't think this is a good time to go to the bond market because therefore investors will actually be demanding a higher risk premium for holding government debt.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Yami. He is senior lecturer at the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration. Earlier, I had with me Kojo Nkrumah. He is ranking member on the Economic and Development Committee in Parliament. My name is Faustina Safan. That's how we wrap up Top Story.